Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to this industry event preview. My name is Eric Cavanaugh. I'll be your host for today's webcast entitled Spark, Modern Data Platforms Preview. That's exactly right, folks. You're about to see a preview of the inaugural episode of Spark. It's a 3-day seminar taking place here in Austin, Texas at the end of this month and beginning of next month. So we have a couple speakers on the line who are going to talk about what's going on at Spark and what it might mean for you. So here's an advertisement for the show. You can see April 29th to May 1st. We want to thank our sponsors, Dell, Composite Software, and Parexel. Of course, Radiant Advisors is the brain trust behind Spark, and the Bloor Group, our very own Robin Bloor, is going to be speaking. And of course, Inside Analysis is our content site that many of you have probably visited one time or another. So that's a bit about that. So let's talk about the topic today, shifts in the architectural landscape. That's actually the tectonic plates. I think one on the left is the United States, the other on the right is the sort of Asian European plate way up in the hinterlands or in the cold areas way up somewhere or way down. I'm not even sure which. But the point is that we are facing a tremendous shift, a tectonic shift, literally, in the field of information management. You've heard all about this big data stuff. There are other issues, of course. We hear about data virtualization very often these days. And really, big data analytics is one of the biggest changes that's occurring. There are all of these innovations in things like analytic databases, in data integration technologies, massive parallel processing, especially when done right, can do amazing things. We've seen mergers, acquisitions, all kinds of things are happening. So what does that mean for you out there in the real world trying to solve business problems with data? Well, it means there are so many options available to you today. There are so many different ways to do things, but the key, and here's where the more things change, the more they stay the same, is your architecture, your BI and analytics architecture, your information flows, as Robin Bloor will say. And you'll hear John OBrien talk about rediscovering business intelligence, taking a fresh look at your reporting environment, at your ad hoc query environment, what you're using, how you're doing things. There are so many options today, and the real bottom line is that the architecture needs to be very flexible and agile. If you think about, of course, these terrible things, earthquakes, when they happen, well, if you look at the architecture in places like San Francisco for the new buildings that are built there, in places certainly all over Japan, those buildings are now architected with incredibly powerful foundations that are designed to absorb tremendous shock value. And that's really a good metaphor for what you need out there in your information foundation, in your data foundation. Because if you don't have that, you're going to have some problems. So let's kind of move through the slides here. So the state of data warehousing today, well, as we're just discussing, this whole industry is changing fundamentally. There are lots of these new tools, and many of them spin out of the open source projects like Cassandra, like MongoDB, like CouchDB. There are all these interesting projects, many of them Apache projects, kind of spinning out of these activities. And what's happening is a lot of these tools and technologies are leveraging some of the key capabilities of these new databases. And of course, we have analytic databases like Parexel, one of our sponsors. They have a relationship with Amazon. Maybe some of you heard about the whole Amazon Redshift. Now Amazon is offering data warehousing in the cloud, $1,000 per terabyte per year, right? That's a pretty significant development in the whole industry of information management. When you think about how much it has traditionally cost for 1 terabyte of data in a high-powered data warehouse for a year, I can tell you this, it's a lot more than $1,000. It's hard to say how much because it's hard to find out what those prices are. You can't really just go to the vendor and say, well, how much is it? Usually they say, well, how much you got? It's kind of a difficult thing if you're an end user trying to buy a tool, trying to buy some technology to help your business, and you have to go through this really intense negotiation process to get to the bottom of things. That's not so fun. So this is just one thing that's happening, but the point is that if your architecture is flexible, if it is agile, then you are going to be able to take advantage of all these new tools, these big data analytics tools, right? We keep hearing about velocity and volume and variety and veracity. There are lots of V words we could throw at it. Momentum, we keep hearing about data streams. Goodness gracious, there are some amazing technologies these days for just harnessing streams in real time. I mean, it's amazing how much things are changing. So the whole point is that this seminar series is really designed to help you as an end user understand what you need to do from an architectural standpoint to be able to deal with these changes, these shocks to the system, and there are more common, folks, believe me, to be able to deal with that and to enable yourself to take advantage of the new tools and the new technologies. So there's a slide about yours truly at the top. Analyst John OBrien, founder and CEO of Radiant Advisors. He's one of the smartest guys I know, excellent presenter, and he's a consultant too, goes out and works with people in end-user companies all the time. Same for analyst Robin Bloor, our very own chief analyst here at the Bloor Group. They are going to be the keynotes for this event that is in Austin later this month. So, Rediscovering BI. With that, I'm going to hand the keys over to John OBrien. And John, the floor is yours. Just click on that slide and use the down arrow on your keyboard.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Eric, and everybody for joining. And I'm also looking forward to chatting with Robin in a few minutes here. But so my little section that I have is really a thrust behind what Radiant Advisors does, also a big piece behind what the Spark events, concept was born out of. Rediscovering BI, I've heard many in the industry also talk about what we're going through today as really a renaissance in BI, which I couldn't agree more, because we've been at this and doing it and evolving and getting better for decades now, and all of a sudden in the last, I think 3 to 5 years, the landscape on every level is changing and changing dramatically and changing quickly. As an strategic advisory practice, one of the things we get to do, and I enjoy doing myself, is that we work with companies that are planning their architectures or their BI programs and dealing with, and mainly not reacting, but more of a, how do I take advantage of what's going on? There's so much activity going on. So a lot of what we have found is the things that we've relied on, and I'll throw a few curveballs out there to say that in some ways it's a little bit of a kind of kicking out the crutches and saying, look, we've had this kind of textbook way of doing data warehousing and BI for many years, but we're kind of back to basics again, which means we have to rediscover in a lot of ways what BI was intended for, what it's about, the purpose of it. It's not about a noun, let's build a data warehouse. We're trying to do important, critical things, and I'll give credit to the business analytics movement for kind of revitalizing what BI is about, and the big data movement as well. So BI continues to evolve. Rediscovering BI says, let's go back to being able to look at everything that we do and kind of return to our roots, if you will, and then come up with what I like to tell our clients, the things that we create from an architecture or BI platforms are really, a few years down the road after many of us do this and prove it out, will become the next generation of best practices in the industry. So much going on right now for me to hear people say this is a best practice. I don't know that we've seen it implemented so many times to make those claims. I know that our traditional ones have been around for decades and can make those claims, and we're looking for the next generation of best practices, which means rediscovering BI and kind of back to the drawing board. Just a little bit of my background for any of our attendees that haven't seen either my papers or presentations in the industry. I've been living data warehousing and BI for just over 25 years. Most of that was working in large corporations as a perm employee, therefore living with our mistakes, but at the same time learning how these architectures and platforms evolve. You don't build Rome in a day, and the data platforms that we built takes time, evolve, change direction, priority for a number of different reasons, and these were a lot of the guiding principles for what we do. Instruction at seminars, at conferences, at companies, doing presentations, workshops, instructions. I've been doing that for over 10 years on my own as well. Radiant has quite the catalog that enables that, as well as practitioner, a little bit of advisory. I've also can say that I was the co-founder and CTO of a data warehouse MPP appliance company that did big data systems for a number of years. So in 2005, I helped co-found Datopia and was the acting CTO there for approximately 5 years. And then my background is interesting for some folks because what does mechanical engineering have to do with data warehousing? We build systems, right? My specialty was instrumentation and control systems. It was all about collecting data from day one. At the same time, backgrounds in different companies such as nuclear engineering, pretty much a strong statistics background from there. And then also the business side of the world, which says, how do we need to really deliver business value all the time, which drives architectures, it drives what we do, it drives why we are in BI. So just a quick thing on my background for us. So the Spark event, really the Spark event itself and our inaugural one, like Eric had mentioned, is in Austin at the end of this month, on the 29th, and it is focused on modern data platforms. In the future, they'll be on modern data platforms or other topics like enterprise analytics, but at the end of this month, we're going to take 3 days and drill into and do sessions and work through all the different aspects. And day one focuses on returning to our roots and talking about the challenges and needs for today's modern data platforms. Day two tackles all the different aspects and gives you the tools for tackling modern data integration, if you will. It's not your old traditional ETL world. And then on day three is pretty exciting because on day three we also take a look at, as an architect, all the database technologies that are out there. So we'll pull together everything that we did in day one and day two and take a look at the spectrum and approach that we put and install at companies that say, here's the framework, the modern data platform framework, and here's how you can very quickly take a look at all the analytic databases. Where does the big data fit in this? Where does my old traditional data warehouse fit? What's my data strategy? And so when you walk out of the session, you're going to have all the tools and techniques to evaluate what you've got, take a fresh look at things. We did a preview session in Atlanta last week, and a number of attendees said, their number one comment was that this opened my eyes to a new way of looking at how we do architecture, and that's, we've been hearing that as we've presented previews and parts of this over the last year, both here and in Europe. So it's been quite exciting and it's quite proven for us, as well as at the clients that we take care of from Radiant Advisors. So Spark is an event to do that. We have 3 great sponsors, so you'll get to hear from them. If you go to the website, you'll see the full agenda. A lot of community building is our big key, bringing a lot of people in Austin together, networking, sharing information, getting to learn about the products and these vendors, in addition to how to apply them at your companies. And that's what the Spark events really are about. The term Spark for us comes from the idea how to think differently, think outside the box there. So when we take a look at this, modern data platforms was really born out of a lot of our advisory work at different companies, and these are 3 of the kind of #1 questions we were getting asked by lead architects, directors of BI, program managers, and CIOs. And we saw this common theme at company after company that we were brought in to help. So #1 was the traditional BI architectures. You can call them your hub and spokes or your architected data marts, but these kinds of best practices really struggle with trying to keep up with today's big data environments, and we have a Hadoop over in the corner, or how do we do business analytics now? And people are struggling to see where that fit into the old best practices and the classic architectures. So they've asked for, what's the new architecture look like? How do we get involved and not be reactionary, but take control of where we're going and have a frame of mind of dealing with any question that comes up with. So that was the #1 challenge we heard. Another one I think was quite interesting is that most companies are saying there are such great advancements in data technologies. The advanced, analytics piece, the data virtualization piece, the acceptance of analytic databases within the platform. But as companies, they're like, we see so many vendors out there, so many tools. How do we evaluate them? How do we know where they fit in my architecture? What's their place? What's their role? Am I adopting one thing and getting rid of the other? So part of that was another thing that, we were helping companies with that the modern data platform is built on as well. Companies that, like most of us, I'm sure, have existing data warehouses in place and have been building them for many, many years and evolving them, but they now struggle with, where's my architecture at? How do I evolve it? Do I throw it away and start over? Can I take it in a new direction? How do I really manage the architecture? And we've really done a lot with the techniques which implement all the, it sounds a little contrary, but all the Agile kind of manifesto concepts and principles can be applied to architecture. So we've taken those principles and used them as a way to make your architecture evolve, improve, very iterative. Now, of course, architectural iterations might be months or quarters. Nevertheless, they are iterations about building a great data platform. So a lot of what we do is we talk about how to rethink what architecture should be, right? And Robin and I have had this discussion where we say that, in some cases with the companies and the people that we talk to regularly, it's learning to let go of the old ways that we've had to do this and rethink about what a good platform should look like that meets all of our BI needs for the business, and reimagine how BI can transform the analytics and what we deliver, incorporating more capabilities. So for a lot of us, if you have solid principles, framework, and guidance in any company, in any situation, you now have the confidence to create new architectures, to manage them, evolve them, as well as, like we're saying, maybe down the road we're going to look back and you're going to say, hey, that's what we did, and you know what? That turns out it was a best practice. At the time, we were just doing what made sense. Rediscover what BI is all about for the business. We've been at it for so long. A lot of what we do is remember why we do BI, remember what the value is, and how do we deliver that value to the business. So we do focus on that as well. And Rediscovering BI is, our own industry magazine that I invite everybody to, just go to our website and click on that and take a look at the new issues that we're quite proud of that just got released this morning for this event as well. So that's the premise for Spark. Quite quickly, I'll just take a look at day one. The challenge that we heard, traditional BI architectures and past best practices fall short, meeting the demands for today's business. For what do I do with big data? If you've got a big data pilot or project on the side, what we've seen last year, this year, what everybody's talking about is how do I integrate my Hadoop environment with my existing data warehouse? Are they the same? Are they different? Do they complement? How do we do that? How do we run advanced analytics on top of these multiple platforms? What is the process for developing analytic models in addition to data models and managing semantics? What new data technologies do we need to be looking at and considering and evaluating? And a lot of that's been the challenge we've been addressing with companies. So we like to refer to modern BI architects as those who need to create sound architectures that are now based on, I like to think we're returning to our roots, returning to data management principles, but I do see it in a lot of companies and a lot of the sessions that we've delivered in the past. I can ask key questions about principles, and what you really discover is that there are different architects. That's why there are different architectures in our industry, and there are more than one way to approach things. Understanding these principles, understanding yourself as an architect where you sit on that spectrum, does help you communicate with others that have a slightly different, kind of beliefs on those principles, and we focus on that. How to evolve an architecture, how to manage it through these Agile techniques, and how to seek out, these BI capabilities. You can think and talk about data, and you can talk about logical data warehouses, but frankly, if you've got some real-time, high availability, extreme performance requirements. How we design warehouses has a lot to do with that. I've built warehouses that was solely built on service level agreements alone and took the logical data aspects separately. So day one is really understanding your architecture in a new way. So once you understand how we look at architecture, you can take a look at your own architecture and you're going to say, wow, I never looked at it that way. And now you can create a path forward for those things that are important to your business. Day two, we do the same thing. We've got a data platform. We've got to pull it out of operational systems, external, customer desktops, everything we can get our hands on. And I think the challenge is really blending data integration techniques. It's not classic ETL anymore that does the transforms and persist data, or the ELTs that some people like to talk about. But when and how do you use data virtualization in your model? When do you do data replication? These are the things that we take a look at. So, for example, I may make sense to transform some data, but for agility and discovery, I may try working with data and then decide for performance reasons I need to transform that. Understanding and separating the data integration. So one of the things we do talk about is how to do logical data integration modeling. How do we have special classes for data acquisition, source system acquisitions, whether they're kind of the traditional operational systems, streaming architectures. We can componentize those. We can recognize them. We can also build them in. One of the things that I would do is, if you're familiar with, for example, how do we acquire data out of operational systems? And we see traditional CDCs. An old technique we used to do is how to standardize that, turn that into a meta-driven architecture, and then have that drive in a data parameterized way how we do acquisitions out of that. So for us, that was one technique. When do we use data replication, for bringing data? We know that it's great for persisting data across platforms, but at the same time, it might be appropriate, for some of the operational reporting needs. So different forms of, we need to transform this data to persist it in the proper data store. People are, one question that we get quite often asked is, should we bring, we have some companies, for example, that are saying as an architectural pattern, we're going to take all data, not just unstructured or internet or external data, but all of our operational systems data is now going to go into Hadoop, and Hadoop is our new staging area. So within that, they also have patterns that say we can write MapReduce programs that will replace our transformations and bring that into the structured enterprise data warehouse. One of the benefits of this pattern becomes the insulation from changes on operational systems. So, when we look at data integration, we do take a look at modeling it correctly, componentizing it, and creating a four-tiered, these are cleansing type transformations, these are physical or integrity-based transformations, these are loading, these are publishing engines. And when you model things like that, you increase componentization, you increase reusability, and then when you drop it into the physical layer like we're talking about, you can now decide, does that make the most sense to put that in a virtualization layer or through a traditional, ETL transformation type layer? So breaking down data integration in that way gets us away from these, pieces of code for transformation that are kind of all in one across multiple different ETL developers. And now we have kind of a standard practice. There's a lot of standards and techniques that we bring in there. Standardized logging frameworks, metadata that you want to leverage, using data integration coupled with metadata to do analytics about the own health and performance of your data warehouse is another technique that we use, and we have standard frameworks for as well. So data integration is just as important as how you manage an overall architecture. And then I think on the traditional, if you will, integrating the analytic databases, we do get asked, there are so many out there in the market. There are some great ones, there are some proven ones, there are some up-and-coming ones. That evaluation process is important, but we also have a three-tiered kind of framework and architecture that says, where does my traditional data warehouse go? The Oracle data warehouse, or the Teradata data warehouse, or multiple federated architectures between IBM and pick your favorite tool. Do I move those all to the analytic databases? Are the analytic databases an offload position? Are they the data marts? So we kind of break away from that common thinking that we've had for years, incorporate the big data and Hadoop as well, and look at what are the advantages in those guys. Scalability, performance, low cost, the information management principle that says, taking data and putting it on its proper value persistence layer says that all this data of undiscovered value, probably goes onto a platform that has the lowest cost of ownership and management. Discovering value on that can say, let's move it to an analytic database, but let's also couple all of that high energy, high event data with the really strong and solid reference data within data warehouses. So once again, with the NoSQL data stores that we explore, like the graph databases and the text analytics, to say BI is not just about SQL statements. If you want to understand relationships, you need to be able to incorporate a graph database or text analytics to add value to the business. In order to do that, where do they fit in this platform? How do you enable or connect users to something that does not speak SQL? Because all of our BI tools do. So this is just one of the slides I pulled out from, one of the discussions on that day, which kind of shows this three-tiered architecture that says, we do believe, and we are, helping companies implement a three-tiered where Hadoop or a key value store on the far left has the highest order of magnitude. Then on the far right, your traditional, what we call reference data. It can be MDM solutions. It can be multiple enterprise data warehouses. And then in the middle being a strong analytics tier. Half of that analytics tier we consider to be highly optimized. The in-memory systems, the columnars, the MPPs do well there because they have in-database analytic capabilities that you can execute, drop in your own routines. But on the other side of that, you have the highly specialized analytic tier, which are the graph databases, the document databases, if you will, the text analytics. And in some cases, you might even map in your traditional cube or your data marts into that space and say, yeah, that's where my current data warehouse is, with the traditional enterprise data warehouse and the cubes there that are dependent from that. But this new three-tiered view is not that much different, except we now can bring in the Hadoop data as well as the enterprise data warehouse to intersect in the middle much more. Data virtualization is what takes all of these databases and says, look, they are a single platform, because from BI users' perspective, we don't believe they want to manage or worry about where they need to go for the data. They want to go to one place, the data platform, to be able to enable all of these capabilities. And services and things like HCatalog out there all come together to form this abstraction layer that enables this platform to work. So this is just an example of one of the slides that we discuss on day 3. I just felt like I had slides with text, so let's toss a picture up there. Analytic methodologies. On the far left, you can see semantic discovery, where people are using abstraction on top of Hadoop environments to profile data, try out routines, discover analytics, but then promote that into the analytic tier and incorporate enterprise data warehouses. So there are some methodologies that we take a look at as well. Basically, these methodologies for analytics get enabled when you have a data platform there. So just to wrap up, the Spark event I kind of touched off. We wanted to share this work that we do with our clients. It's very much out there for educational, for discussion, for workshops, very much to bring in what people get to do in their jobs and their companies and how to apply that immediately when you go back to your companies. Plenary sessions are like Robin, who's up next, who's going to give a keynote and his perspectives on the industry and some of the hot technologies that architects need to be looking at. Panel discussions from our sponsors. We saw Dell, we saw Parexel, and Composite Software are going to give demos and have analysts participate in asking those hard questions that we go through that you're familiar with from insight analysis from a briefing perspective. Research, polling, we'll have community sessions that break out, a lot of networking, a lot of sharing, and it's about, building your own network of those people who are in similar roles to you and similar challenges, and keeping everybody in touch afterwards. So that's kind of, my section there to just try to give an overview of what the event is about, where we're going to focus modern data platforms for the Spark events, our website, and follow-up for things as well. So any thoughts, Eric?
No, that sounds great. Let's hear from Dr. Bloor. We got a number of really good questions in here already in the queue, so folks will address those in just a few minutes when Robin finishes his piece. But no, I'm glad you threw that graphic up there too and talked about the three-tiered architecture, because as we have been discussing on this show and on many other shows, things are changing rapidly. And boy, if you have the right underpinnings, you're going to be able to do a lot of different things, where if you don't, you're going to have trouble. You're going to have some problems. So let's see, Robin, let me go ahead and hand the keys over to you, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks for the floor, Eric. My participation in this, apart from the fact that I'll be around, is really to give 1.5 keynotes. One of them, me and John decided that we would play at what you could call dueling analysts. Not that we're going to have an acrimonious debate unless, both of us have been drinking too much the night before. More likely that we're just going to approach a topic from 2 different directions. So partly that particular, if I understand it correctly, I'm sure John will correct me afterwards or possibly while I'm speaking. John's going to take the data angle and I'm going to take the analytics angle. And we're going to look at what we could call the new world. Therefore, what I'm about to do now is to give a vague preview of that part of it. Basically, these BI categories are the categories that we've worked with for about 1.5 years, but basically it's a nice idea to think in terms of BI as consisting of hindsight, oversight, insight, and foresight. And you can certainly categorize various BI capabilities using those 4 categories, although you might discover that some overlap with others and so on and so forth. But it's a nice way of looking at it, and here's one reason why. If you actually think about the whole of the BI space, BI is obviously, clearly it's about getting intelligence from information that you pick up in order to better run the business, to be very simplistic about it. And the interesting thing to me is that the insight aspect is the basis of it. In other words, if you don't actually have sufficient insight, you really won't know what to look at in hindsight. You really won't know which data to put up in terms of oversight, and you really won't know how to structure what we would call foresight analytics. So the heart of the matter, in my opinion anyway, is insight. And of course, insight is all about analytics. If we take a look at the analytical process in overview, you can depict it like this. In other words, you've got a data access issue, so there's various data sources you've got to get at the data. The data may not be in the right form that you want it, so you may have to do ETL, but there's also a kind of set of cleansing that needs to go on. So there's data preparation activity involved in this. Then there's a modeling activity, because you can't just go at the data without some idea. Probably there'll be data volume issues, so you may have to just do a statistical extract to model what you're going to do before you go on to do it. And then you can get into the full analysis of it, and having got into the analytical side and discovered some kind of results that happen to be useful to the business, then you go on to deploy and you execute. That sounds fairly simple, doesn't it? But it isn't. And we know it isn't. We've been doing this for a long, long time. We've been getting more and more sophisticated through the 90s. into the last decade, I just watched BI grow and grow in terms of the capabilities, in terms of the way that people use things, in terms of new products emerging, in terms of new ideas emerging. And I'm just talking about analytics, you know. And I would argue that everything comes from that in the end, because all of the other BI capabilities fall out of analytics. If you actually look at the analytical process, and this will be my side, so I'm not going to go into it in any great depth, but this will be my side of the argument. We're talking about doing the analysis on the data. The data has to be prepared. We actually have to have the data flow that will support it, and so on and so forth. The latencies have to be right, all of that stuff. But the analytical job is actually definable, and this is my generic definition of it, and actually this is before deployment and execution, so it's just kind of the first part of it, you know. And if you look at this, you see that this is not so, I'm not going to go into it in detail now, but you can see that this is not simple. Right? You have data sources, you have data prep and extract. You create sample data, that's an iterative loop. You do modeling, that's an iterative loop. You go into analyzing, you may have discovered that your model was wrong when you start to do the analyzing. So there's an iterative loop that goes back to doing the modeling cycle, you know. But if the analyst, you know, if the model is good enough, then analysis can go ahead, but you actually have to do full data prep and extract on that in order to get the subject data. And as you do the analysis, you may discover in one way or another it's wrong, so you may have an iterative loop around there, and then you come out with results. Now, this is, in my opinion, the task on the business side that drives everything. So in the interchange with John, I'll be arguing that everything centers around this, and all his considerations about data flow and Hadoop and how you use all of those things are actually subsidiary and not really that important. And I'm hoping he'll disagree with me. So that's the dueling analyst thing. But there are some questions, and these are questions on both sides of the line, and this will probably be the theme of my keynote presentation, where I just get the stage to myself. The first question, and I think it's a really good question, is what difference does big data make? Look, we've been doing all of this mathematical side of it for a long, long time. So, okay, the data's bigger. Let's just have some more machines and that should fix it, right? You know, a few more servers here and there, and maybe we'll have to up the network speed and we're done, right? Or maybe there's an architectural issue here. I mean, just maybe there's an architectural issue. And I would suggest that there really is an architectural issue, and you need to think deeply about it, primarily because it's not static. We aren't looking at a static target here. We're looking at a moving target, and it's moving right now. You know, it's like it will be different for individual companies. It will be different in 6 months' time than it is now. What difference does computer power make? And that's a very good question, and that kind of, in a way, goes into the whole issue of the cloud, the issue of the time to deploy, the issue of getting infrastructure in place, as well as how does that make a difference to the analytical job, right? And finally, the question, and this is the real question, I suppose, at the end of the day, is how should companies take advantages of the possibilities and the opportunities that are now available? Because they are, you know? We can do things we couldn't do even a year ago. So there are opportunities, at least for some organizations, and maybe for every organization, who knows? And the final thing, well, architecture has been my obsession, software architecture primarily, but it's actually hardware and software architecture has been my obsession for a mere 25 years. And I'm still interested in it. In my view, and I will be explaining what I mean by this, but in my view, we are moving towards an event-driven IT architecture, or we could say event-driven IT architectures. I'm not sure there's just one. I'm not sure, you know, I think that it starts to be event-driven when latency starts to drive the way you organize the data and the processes. Once the speed of the arrival of events starts to drive that, then I think we're in an event-driven architecture. And actually, we've been moving towards it for a fairly long time. I'm going to explain, or probably not explain, but in one way or another, I'm going to describe how this has happened and what it probably means going forward. Many say what it probably means. If you extrapolate it, what it means. I can't allow for, and it seems to happen all the time, but I can't allow for new technologies merging from left field because you can't predict them. But certainly you can say, given the way that the industry has evolved, looking back over, and I tend to take a time frame of 40 years, but looking back over 40 years and you see what difference computer power made to everything, then you start to get some means at least of extrapolating what is going to happen in the future. Even if, to a certain extent you get it 50% wrong, you're going to get some of it right. So the question is, what does this mean? And the other question is, what difference will it make? And that's what I'm hoping to address in the keynote that I give, where I don't have to share the stage with John, who will probably put me into the shade when we do dueling analysts. And I think that's all I've got to say, unless there's a slide I can't remember. Oh yes, that is all I've got to say. Would you like to take control again, Eric?
Yes, indeed. I know we have some really good questions here, so let me just kind of dive right into some of these things here. So let's do this. I'll throw a question out and each of you kind of give an answer because there are some fairly provocative questions, some simple ones that I think really do speak to the heart of what's going on here. So here's a great question. One of the attendees is asking, who currently drives the big data BI field or the big data analytics field? I'll throw it out to you, John. First, technology companies by proposing novel designs or business users posing problems?
That is interesting because the companies that we visit, we do see analytic programs being driven by the business side units today primarily. However, these groups are very much they're interested in the analytics, they're not interested in managing platforms. So they take an approach of, hey, this is what we want to do, this is important, but the data warehouse group or BI team is kind of busy, we don't want to get IT involved, and that's kind of one little scenario we do see at companies quite often. The second one that we run across becomes within IT, separate from the BI team, somebody is spinning up they got a sponsor, it's a project, and they've created their own like Hadoop environment, and they're starting to learn and do some analytics on that, writing some programs, leveraging Hive, and we've seen that come out of IT, but once again, not within BI. We see the BI team continue to do the mainstream reporting, analytics, dashboards kind of march that it's been on, and these two side things have been kind of tugging at it a little bit. And after having playing with the environments, we see that the teams are now starting to say, okay, time to start bringing this together. How do we incorporate the business side component so it's much more self-service? So that's one of the things we get asked quite often. It's like, how do I create an environment that's very self-service oriented? And then we start to lean towards an architecture and technology that's much more virtualized, agile, and a data platform that can be very ad hoc and deal with, overcoming things. But you're not going to make the Hadoop side go away with the unstructured event that everybody just wants to upload. Now, so, it's kind of coming together this year after last year's kind of explosion in the big data market where everybody jumped in and started playing. Now they're starting to ask, okay, let's do something meaningful with this. It's kind of the party is over type of thing. I think we know the Gartner term for the trough of disillusionment. One of the things that we're also working with, we're participating in the Big Data Boot Camp in New York next month, which really focuses on the data governance aspect because, unfettered access to all data that enables everybody to pull data from and create analytics and do things. Well, where's the governance? Where do you have those models being managed? Should everybody have access to anything? Should anybody be able to upload anything and play with data? So their data governance programs are also being asked to extend defining new roles and policies around managing this, because we've been doing BI for decades, and we have governance kind of built into us, and when we see the free-for-all that's going on, it does make us quite nervous, and it's starting to kind of come into reality at companies we see this year. So is it being business-driven? Yes, the business demand is there. It's the new capability. Segregating and understanding its relationship to traditional BI or mainstream is important. Where are these projects coming from? The business isn't looking to host and manage these environments, but other parts of IT. It's a great technology in the big data space. How do we exploit that and still manage and govern a good environment?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, and well, I was just going to say, this is what I've been seeing too. And granted, I'm in the media. I'm kind of on the outside, just listening to case studies and talking to vendors and interacting with people who are out there building solutions and so forth. But I agree with you that just about everything I've heard speaks to a bifurcation in the marketplace of different groups doing big data analytics versus traditional BI, and I have to think that's going to come together, and I think architecturally that's where you need to find a way to bring that stuff together, because otherwise what do you have? You wind up having two trains going in either slightly or greatly different directions down the track, but it's the same enterprise, and that's just not good at all. So Robin, Bloor, let me bring you in on that one. Merging these worlds, I have to think, is a prime directive these days for, at least for data-driven organizations, right?
Well, yes. I mean, it's clearly the case. Actually, I would say for every organization, I think all organizations are to some extent data-driven, so I wouldn't want to make the distinction. Some of them have, let us say, more fluid data issues to deal with. In other words, the situation's moving underneath them more swiftly than other organizations, but I think it's all there. In terms of who drives it, this has always been a question that, and John, in a way, has answered it reasonably well in various areas, but, the fundamental thing that happens with business and technology is somebody at the top takes a look and perceives that there's opportunity. They're normally not versed enough in all of the technology in order to be able to work out how to pursue that opportunity. But really everything that actually happens, nothing happens unless organizations buy the technology and start using it. On the other hand, you've got, so that's what I would call a top-down movement, That's the motivation. The motivation is for organizations either to make more money or to work more efficiently. But on the other side, you have a whole host. The IT industry has become huge, and it includes a vast number of innovators. So the innovators come to the market, and they put their goods on display to the people who are interested in doing something reasonably radical. And, if any given technology or any given approach, the consultancies can't be ignored here either because they can play a part. But, if anything is seen to be successful, then fairly swiftly in time it gets a large amount of adoption that will probably be good for at least one vendor, but it might actually be good for quite a few vendors that are doing fairly similar things. So, it's, at the end of the day, obviously it's opportunity that's driving it, but you've got an awful lot of technologists in the space, and they're largely within the vendor community, that are looking to create enabling stuff because they see what the possibilities are. So it comes from both directions. Within the organization, the fragmentation between the old data warehouse world and the new, let's call it the new Hadoop world, I think that's, it meets to the point of governance. And at some point in time on the Hadoop side, people are going to be asking, are you really governing this? And if they aren't really governing it, they're going to start to experience the problem of not doing that. So that speaks to the fact that the two sides must come together, but the idea that the two sides will come together swiftly, that would be what I would say an optimistic idea. I think they won't.
I think that's exactly right. I think it's, if it must happen, it will happen. That's one of the sort of tautological things I heard from a consultant about 10 years ago. He made a really good point and said, look, if something must happen for your business to run, it is happening. somewhere. Someone is doing something that gets the job done. I thought that was a very interesting perspective. But here's a good question, too, about where the innovation is coming from or what is required, and my answer is yes, but John, I'll throw it out to you. The question is it still a question of compute power, or is it now a question of cloud power? So computer power or cloud power?
That's a good question. One of the things that we talk about is how, technology, it's kind of the tide that rises all boats, right? We have advances in cores and memory that are just making certain technologies even better and faster than ever before. So we always have this race, and having come out of the MPP, the massively parallel processing world, while we used to talk about, and I had a great debate the other day with some folks talking about the scale up versus scale out debate.
Right, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Going into the scale out debate, and I was there for many years saying, why would I ever tune anything when I can simply throw parallelism at a problem? And that's great. Get away from tuning. It's more management. But the scale-up side of the world has been catching up again. And now we're saying, well, we can scale up. How many cores can you put on a chip today? How much memory can you put into a machine? So that the scale-up architectures with columnar and with compression, they are, I would say very easily you could run 40 terabyte warehouses in those kinds of scale-up architectures, whereas years ago, they used to top out at the 5 and 10 terabyte mark. So that's been rising because of hardware technology. The scale-up, whether it's an MPP database or a Hadoop distributed file system, really leverages kind of unlimited scalability, if you will, because of parallelism. But we're always striking a balance between design or architecture and the hardware that kind of meets your needs. I mean, how many warehouses out there today can say we safely operate underneath 40 terabytes, and you could throw that into a multi-core in memory today in some cases. So we're always having to check ourselves to when do we let go of an old paradigm. The classic old example would be we used to build summary tables. There you go, right? Well, look at the technology today. I would even debate a lot of the cubes that we have today. When you look at, we pre-calculate everything dimensionally because it gave us performance. Well, today's world, look at what we can do with columnar databases, MPP, and in memory. Do we still really need to use that? Or do we still need to architect and design a way when technology has kind of come up? And it's really going to be a pendulum that just keeps swinging back and forth. And I kind of love that, yep, it was a scale out. And for the ultra scale stuff, no question. But sometimes you might want to just stay in the scale-up world because it more than meets your needs for what you need to do in BI. And knowing when to draw that balance, knowing when to not cling to one way because that's the answer, you have to ask yourself what's going on today in the technologies they can leverage or just simply the hardware that we run on. And clouds offer another great example of that. The previous slide you had up, which was Robin's slide, I think is going to be a great debate for us at the Spark event because one of the top things coming up is you can look at this and discuss the role of an analytic database or an analytics sandbox. What does that look like? Should that be in the cloud? Because in the cloud with an analytics sandbox today, the business users can run very self-sufficiently. Departmentalize, should you have a group sandbox? It's a great enabler, and it's a coupling of multiple things that are happening from the business analytics side, from the business side, being able to pull data, be self-sufficient. It's another trend that's folding in there, and fold in the cloud availability and the price points of these. Many companies are happy to be self-sufficient now. But so what is an analytics sandbox anymore? We used to think it was a physical thing. Now it's a virtual thing in a partition, or now it can be a departmental thing in the cloud. It can be a consolidated multi-tenancy type environment as well. I mean, we've worked on those quite successfully. So the whole concept, role, purpose, logical within an architecture of an analytics sandbox is a great discussion. I think Robin and I will be drilling in on this slide.
Yeah, I think so too, and obviously we say this all the time, so it's quite cliche, but obviously what you want to do is focus on the business need And it seems to me that's going to drive a lot of the tool decisions and architectural decisions. But I guess, Robin, one of the things I look at is the pricing pressure of things like Amazon Redshift. Because if you think about how much money companies are paying for standalone data warehouses right now, enterprise data warehouses, those are extremely expensive operations. And on a webcast a while back talking about what Redshift does, and of course the Parexel engine is baked into Amazon Redshift as a big part of what they're doing over there. But one of the things that the speaker on our event said is, well, truth be told, the data that's already in your enterprise data warehouse that's on-premise is probably going to stay there. And what will happen is people will use new data sources and just kind of test it out in the cloud and make sure everything works right, because truth be told, you need to be very careful about putting a bunch of stuff up in the cloud, even in Redshift. If you plan to take it back out someday, you might have some transitional issues there, right?
Yeah, you could have transitional issues. I mean, it's really not a simple thing, in terms of, what Amazon is doing with Redshift was inevitable. Maybe it happened faster than some people expected, but it was inevitable. But there's two issues here. One is how fast does it go in execution. The other is how fast to deploy. And when it comes to fast to deploy, the cloud wins. It just does. And it's never, the data center is never going to catch up to that, no matter what, because the cloud theoretically scales as large as you want, and the data center theoretically doesn't, and it's that simple. So, that's a dividing line, if you like, or that's something to think about. John has an interesting point when he starts talking about the escalation in power at the various levels. We've got hybrid flash nowadays, which has altered the game. We've had for a period of time the use of graphics cards overlaying server cards to give you extreme parallelism on the chip or from memory to the chip. We've got the scale-out grids that can put together multiple servers that effectively are only about memory. So you can certainly put multi-terabytes onto those grids. And so on and so forth. Well, the interesting thing to me about this is the problem of the technology that was written rather well to run data warehouses. Yeah, you can probably run it in those environments in one way or another, but it really wasn't built for those environments. All of those databases were built, when we're talking about the 1990s databases, but they were all built for spinning disk, and they were optimizing spinning disk. Well, there isn't any spinning disk in sight. Pretty much all of that code is wasted. The data was structured for spinning disks. It was structured for caching off spinning disks, but if you're not caching at all because it's all in memory, it's completely different. And this creates a kind of mismatch. If you really want the speed, then you can't use the old technology to get the speed. So you're going to have a data flow from the old technology. If you want the data that's in the data warehouse sitting in some memory somewhere, you're probably going to have to do some kind of ETL in order to get it in there, and you're probably going to employ software you haven't used before in order to get those extraordinarily low latencies. And you won't be doing much of that in the cloud. If you're doing that in-house, though, you've also got an issue, because I see, like every 3 months or so, I see something that alters the equation just a little bit. So, if I start now, I'll make 3 or 4 choices, and they'll be the best, let's assume, they'll be the best choice I could have made now. But then, 6 months go by, somebody else comes out with something you never saw coming, and all of a sudden, oh, there was a better way to do it, and there now is a better way to do it. And that's always been the case, but, the speed at which this is now happening, I think John would agree, or chime in if you don't, the speed at which this is now happening is kind of bewildering. And, you've got to stick your toe in the water at some point in time. You don't sit back for 20 years waiting for the technology to sort itself out. You're out of business. So, you actually have to take the plunge at some point in time. And when you do, you'll know 2 years later it can be done far better than you're doing it now. And there'll be different latencies, which much more towards the operational intelligence thing. Or else there'll be bigger data than you ever imagined. I mean, it's difficult to know which particular dimensions are going to trip you up next. And that's why architecture is so important, because the architectural principle that rises above everything else is called flexibility.
Yeah, that's right. And one curveball I'll throw into the equation is something that we've been talking about on various shows like DM Radio and some of our other programs that we work with, that there are going to be analytic providers, meaning companies that just give you the analytics. We've had a couple briefing rooms with companies like that where if you're a small to mid-sized organization, you don't have the kind of infrastructure that these bigger companies have. You're just going to rent your analytics. You're going to see why deal with putting up all these servers and dealing with all that stuff. It's just amazing. I love that comment you made, Robin, about how every other day something seems to happen that changes the equation slightly. And I'm thinking, John OBrien, I'll throw this question to you. One tip before I do that is I would have to think that long-term software contracts are going to be a thing of the past, man. I mean, a lot of these big software vendors have made a lot of money by charging maintenance contracts year over year over year. Something like Redshift and the whole open source movement is it really puts a lot of pricing pressure, and that's just good for the end user. But, John, let me throw this one out to you. Speaking of costs and scalability and so forth, excellent question from an attendee who asks, how can you help forecast the costs of using cloud-based solutions that charge by usage? How can companies forecast their project expenditures and run rate costs as they deploy more cloud-based solutions?
Yeah, so I think for the question itself, and this gets back to an earlier comment as well about the cloud versus on-prem, and I do agree that I see, companies where we steer towards is things on-prem tend to stay on-prem, right, unless you have some overriding compliance and regulatory reasons. And those things, as you're aggregating data from your software as a service provider, there are some companies, their strategy is everything is software as a service. We stay light inside, and since it's all out there on the cloud, why not bring it into a cloud data warehouse type platform? So when you look at that, I mean, one of the big factors that comes into that pricing model, and you can, we make estimates, we do analytics on number of users, number of ETL jobs, hours run, CPU, so you can calculate that model. But also data transfer becomes one of the biggest things, depending on how much or how big data you're moving around, either from prem to the cloud or between the clouds, or bringing down in data sets, whether you're saying scan a billion rows and give me the top 3, or you're saying I need a million row data set so I can do some internal analytics because that's the way my data scientists work locally, or analysts. Those are things that you factor into your model. I see that data movement, the network bandwidth, is still kind of the one thing to pay the most attention to in pricing. Data at rest is another one. When we talk about scalability and parallelism, one of the keys we do look at is, are you running in the cloud a scale-up architecture or a scale-out architecture? Because at that point, how you distribute your data across independent nodes versus a cloud resource pool of storage disks like a SAN becomes a factor on performance. And throwing more CPUs at that problem may not help you when your bottleneck is really to a central storage facility. So there are models that do that. There is the discussion about how much of your data today is on-prem with your own company's data or external data, or has your company taken a strategy to outsource or sign up with software as a service providers. And there's a new generation of vendors and tools in the VI space that cater and partner to that. I agree with Robin that in the 25 years I've been doing this as well, I've never seen the rate of change this fast on all fronts. The way the businesses operate today are different, and their demands are new and different. The technologies and options we have available are vast and a lot to just keep up with. And, the options and the pricing models are creative, and the vendors in the space are highly competitive. And they're doing incredible things and just changing the way pricing models have ever been. So, you kind of have that perfect storm going on in the BI world, not to mention just IT, but all of this coming together that we can say it's overwhelming. That's kind of what our clients say and things like that. But for those of us who've been around, it's also it's really exciting again. For us, it's okay, there is no rule book on build it this way, and here's the 1, 2, 3, how do you assemble your data warehouse. Dropping back and saying, these are solid management principles, these are solid governance, how do I think about semantics, how am I going to enable things like analytics, and then take a look at and have ways to organize all of this information is the way that people are going to move forward in this completely new era of BI.
Yeah, that's exactly. Robin, you want to comment?
Oh, yeah. But there again, I was bound to, wasn't I? There's a huge issue here, I think. We've gone from a IT based upon paying out large amounts that covered a number of years in terms of what the investment was, and in some way or other, prorating that over the time period. Well, as soon as you got to the cloud, you're actually in the sphere of the only way this can work. You can't do present values. The way that you used to do all of this is to calculate the present value of the benefits that were going to accrue, but the benefits are happening as you deploy. And nowadays, the time to deployment is so short that the only way to account for this is activity-based accounting, or activity-based costing. That's all you can do. And in terms of the benefits that's accruing, you're going to have in some way or other a means of activity-based evaluation of the benefits. That's how it's going to have to be. But this is a complete mess for the IT departments or for the organizations that are actually funding them, because it means an awful lot of their costs are based upon the old model where you were, in one way or another, taking a cost now, even if, of course, you took a loan to cover it, but taking a cost now to cover a 5-year kind of horizon, and then prorating that over the 5 years, which meant in some way or other you couldn't kind of replace that stuff in 5 years without having kind of violated your original investment. Well, it's not investment anymore because it's cost. But in some way or other, you've got to come through to having some kind of formula that will give you benefit against the cost. And you can probably do that, and you probably don't need the discounted cash flow equations in order to do that. But the problem for IT and for the organization is not all of the costs are like that. So they need two accounting systems for the two kinds of activity. And if you think those two activities are not connected with each other, then all I can say is, wrong you are. They are connected.
Yeah, and I would just throw in there, and I completely agree that the accounting's changing. One that we hear a lot is time to market, the value of being the first one out there. How fast can I implement a solution and beat my competitor is just a huge value that's hard to quantify.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, hey, folks, we've burned through an hour and 7 minutes here. This is a fantastic conversation. We really hope you can join us in Austin. I realize some of you would have to travel pretty far to do that, but the show is going to be at the end of this month. It's the first in a series, so keep your eyes and ears peeled. We'll be moving around the country. I think San Francisco and New York, I believe, are on the list, but check out some of our websites at insideanalysis.com or radiantadvisors.com for more information about all that. And I'm about to tweet a link to the seminar page, and you can use a coupon called Webcast. So I'm going to put this right there and use a promotional code called Webcast to get $150 off of the price for this event. But goodness gracious, thank you, John O'Brien. Thank you to Dr. Robin Bloor. Big thank you to all of our sponsors, to Composite Software, to Dell, and Parexel for their sponsorship, helping us pull this event off. And with that, we will bid you farewell. And yes, I got several emails, people wanting to have a copy of the deck. We will make sure to get that to you. And with that, we'll say thank you so much. Hope you can join DM Radio tomorrow. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.